Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is episode number 3 of Crazed Criminal. And tonight's episode is a pretty gruesome one. Something that probably could have been prevented in many ways. And there's going to be some parts that are pretty disturbing, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a listener discretion advised. So it's a story about a kidnapping and murder that pretty much took the world by storm. A crime that happened in broad daylight. Something that could have and should have been stopped. This is the murder of James Bulger. It was a Friday, February 12th, in 1993, and it was just your average run of the day in a little town called Kirkby Merseyside in England. Nothing out of the ordinary going on. James and his mother, Denise, were making their way over to a shopping center. It's called the New Strand Shopping Center. Now, Denise and little James, had plans on doing some shopping, getting some dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary. So, James and his mom made their way down to A.R. Tim's butchery shop. That was on the lower floor of the shopping center. And Denise decided to take her hands off of John and look around at some of the stuff going on. So about 3:40ish, she turns around, and James is nowhere to be found. He completely disappeared. Now, I've had this happen to me before, and it's got to be probably the scariest thing known to man. I was at White Marsh Mall, and my stepdaughter, who was probably around the age of 2 or 3-ish, I turned around for 1 second, was looking at the rack, and I turned back around and she was gone. Luckily, she left the store and she went to a security guard. And we found her just one store over with a security guard. But things like this happen all the time. So Denise called the police and, hoping for the best. And it took 2 days for the police to find out where James had went. And it was only because 2 school-age boys that were walking the railroad tracks, and they discovered a body. And in fact, was actually cut in half by a train. So the boys obviously called the police. The police came and they discovered this body. And it had no shoes, no socks, no pants, no underwear. had bruises all over the body. And in fact, they were thinking it was possibly a sexually motivated crime because the foreskin of this child was forcibly pulled back. So they went to the footage of the shopping center, and that's where at about 3:42 p.m. in the afternoon they discovered the footage they were looking for. Two youths suggesting that they were the killers were possibly teenagers. It was really hard to tell because the footage was very low definition. It wasn't high def like they have today. It was extremely low def, and they couldn't really tell how old these two boys were. So they arrested somebody, questioned them, and later releasing the initial suspect. Now, he actually had to leave town because of vigilantes were giving him threats. Now, he wasn't even the end-all suspect. But this boy, James, was only 2 years old. So everybody was on watch. Now, the breakthrough came really when a woman seeing slightly enhanced images of the two boys on national television recognized one of the suspects by the name of John Venables, who she knew had played truancy with the other suspect, which was Rob Thompson. So she contacted police, and the boys were ultimately arrested. Now, people did see these two with the young boy. And it's amazing that nobody called the police. Because let me tell you what happened. Early reports, and as well as the police report and evidence found at the scene. Here's the situation that happened. These boys walked James on a 2.5-mile walk across Liverpool to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. Now, this is where things get a little violent, because during the walk, the boys decided to drop James right on his face, causing a lump on his forehead. Now, as I said, 38 people had seen the three walking together. Nobody called the police to say that they saw anything suspicious. Now, 2 people did ask, Thompson and Venables, but they claimed that Bulger was their younger brother or that he was lost and that they were taking him to a local police station. Now, during the walk, they took him to a pet shop and they were eventually told to leave. So, where it all came to an end here is that the boys arrived at a village of Walton. And with Walton Lane Police Station right across the road facing them, they were kind of hesitant and kind of led Bulger up a very steep bank to a railway line near the disused railway station. And it's called Walton and Anfield, which is close to the Anfield Cemetery. And that's where they kind of began torturing poor James. Now, The boys started by throwing modeling paint into his eyes. They kicked him, they stomped him, they threw bricks and stones at him, and they even put batteries in Bulger's mouth. And according to police, they may have also inserted some batteries into his rectum, although none were found. And then finally, they decided to drop a 22-pound iron bar, which was later on described in court as a railway fish plate, on Bulger. Now, he sustained 10 skull fractures, and as a result of a 22-pound iron bar to his head, he had kind of no option but to pass away in the most horrific death you can ever imagine. Now, later on, Alan Williams, the case pathologist, stated that Bulger suffered so many injuries. As a matter of fact, it was actually 42 in total. And they couldn't really tell which one was the fatal blow. But he did die before he got hit by the train. Now, how did he get hit by the train is because the two wanted it to look like an accident. So they placed him on the train tracks, which is absolutely sick and disturbing. So when they were arrested, the boys had the same blue paint on their clothing that was found on Bulger's body. They both had blood on their shoes. And a matter of fact, the blood on Thompson's shoe matched Bulger's. And it was on the face, and it looked like a shoe print by the same shoe that Thompson was wearing. And it had to have been used with a lot of force, which totally disturbs me. Now, Thompson is said to have asked the police whether the 2-year-old had been taken to the hospital and to get him live again. That was kind of the key that, hey, I kind of did something bad. I don't know why anybody would say that and not actually have done anything. The boys were each charged with murder on February 20th of 93. And they appeared in the South Sefton Youth Court on February 22nd, where they were told they were going to be remanded in custody to wait trial in the aftermath of the arrest. And throughout the entire media accounts of the trial, both of the boys were referred to as Child A and Child B, which was Thompson and Venables. And while they were awaiting trial, they were held in secure units. I'm guessing that's probably for the safety of their self. Now, up to 500 protesters did gather at the South Sefton Magistrates Court during the initial court appearances. Now, their parents, they were moved to different parts of the country and assumed no identities, following multiple death threats from vigilantes. It seems the vigilantes over there are a big thing, and they don't take any crap. But it does make you wonder sometimes, where were the parents during the initial murder and or kidnapping? These kids played hooky from school, which apparently wasn't the first time. Now, the full trial opened up at Preston Crown Court on the 1st of November, and it was conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock away from their parents and the judge and the court officials in legal regalia. The boys did deny the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. Now, the attempted abduction charge came from that same day, but that parent was paying a little bit more attention and kind of swayed the boys away. So they had to find a new victim, which happened to be James. Now, they took this child 2.5 miles away, and that is absolutely crazy to me. Now, each boy sat in view of the court on raised chairs so they could see out of the dock designated for adults, accompanied by 2 social workers. Although they were separated from the parents, they were within touching distance when their families attended the trial. News stories reported the attitudes and behavior of the defendants, and these aspects later criticized by the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled in 1999 that they had not received a fair trial by being tried in public as an adult court. And at the trial, the lead prosecution counsel, Richard Henriquez, successfully rebutted the principle of Dali Incapax, which presumes that young children cannot be held legally responsible for their actions. I beg to differ, and I think that's the problem with these days, that kids aren't held responsible for anything that they do at all, no matter what. It seems that kids just do what they want, and they get away with it. And then they grow up to be adults, and they do the same damn thing. And then they get a slap on the hand because they don't know what's right and what's wrong. Now, Thompson and Venables did not speak during the entire trial, and the case against them was based to a large extent on more than 20 hours of tape-recorded police interviews with the boys, which were played back in court. And Thompson was considered to have taken the leading role in the abduction process, and that Venables, who had apparently initiated the idea of taking Bulger to the railway line. Venables later described how Bulger seemed to like him. He was holding his hand, allowing him to pick him up on a meandering journey to the scene of his ultimate murder. Lawrence Lee, who was the solicitor of Venables during the trial, later said that Thompson was one of the most frightened children he had seen, and accompanying him to the Pied Piper. After his appearance in court, Venables would strip off his clothes, saying, "I could smell James like a baby smell." That makes me kind of sick thinking about it. The prosecution admitted a number of exhibits during the trial, including a box of 27 bricks, a blood-stained stone, Bulger's underpants, and a rusty iron bar described as a railway fish plate. The pathologist spent 33 minutes outlining the injuries sustained by Bulger. Many of those were to his legs and had been inflicted after he was stripped from the waist down. They did say he had severe brain damage, described as extensive, and included a brain hemorrhage. Now, the boys at the time were 11, were found guilty of Bulger's murder at the Preston court on the 24th of November, becoming the youngest convicted murderers of the 20th century. The judge, Mr. Justice Moreland, told Thompson and Venables that they had committed a crime of unparalleled evil and barbarity. And in his judgment, their conduct was both cunning and very wicked. Moreland sentenced them to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, with a recommendation that they should be kept in custody for what he says very, very many years to come. Recommended a minimum term of 8 years. That to me doesn't seem like a very, very many years to come type of deal, but I guess it is what it is. At the close of the trial, the judge lifted reporting restrictions and allowed the names of the killers to be released, saying, "I did this because the public interest overrode the interest of the defendants, and there was a need for an informed public debate on crimes committed by young children." Now, shortly after the trial and after the judge had recommended a minimum of 8 years, Lord Taylor of Gosforth, the Lord Chief Justice, came up with a new recommendation. Said that the boys should serve a minimum of 10 years, which would have made them eligible for release in roughly February of 2003 and be released at the age of 20. Now, the editors of the Sun newspaper handed a petition, and it got about 280,000 signatures to Home Secretary Michael Howard, and it was for a bid to increase the detention time spent by both of these boys in prison, and the petition was successful. So in July of 94, Howard announced that the boys would be in custody for a minimum of now 15 years, which meant that they would not be considered for release until February of 08. And by that time, they would be between 24 and 25 years of age. Now, after the trial, Thompson and Venables were both held at different facilities for their sentence of 15 years. Thompson was held at the Barton Moss Secure Care Center, and that was in Manchester, and Venables was detained at Vardy House, which was a small 8-bedded unit at Red Hawk Bank Secure Unit in St. Helens on Merseyside. Both of these locations were not made publicly known until the boys were released. Details of the boys' lives were recorded, though, twice a day, and on running sheets signed by staff members who had been with them. Now, the records were stored at the units and copied to officials in Whitehall. The boys were taught to conceal their real names and the crime that they had committed, which resulted in their being in the units. Venables' parents regularly visited their son at Red Bank, just as Thompson's mother did, about every 2 to 3 days at Barton Moss. Now, during their lockup, they received education and rehabilitation, despite some initial problems. Venables was said to have eventually made a good progress at Red Bank, resulting in him being kept there for the full 8 years, despite the facility only being a short-stay remanded unit. Both boys, however, they were reported to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and Venables in particular told the experiencing nightmares, flashbacks of the murder. Now, in 1999, the lawyers for both suspects appealed to the European Court of Human Rights that the boys' trial had not been impartial since they were too young to follow proceedings and understanding an adult court. And the European Court did dismiss that claim that the trial was inhumane and degrading treatment, but they did uphold the other claim that the boys were denied a fair hearing by nature of the court proceedings. So the European Court also held that Michael Howard's intervention had led to a highly charged atmosphere, whatever that might mean, which resulted in an unfair judgment. So on the 15th of March in 1999, the court in Strasbourg ruled by 14 votes to 5 that there had been a violation of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights regarding their fairness, stating the public trial process in an adult court must be regarded in case of an 11-year-old child as a severely intimidating process. What other process should they have went through as it being a murder charge? Murder, kidnapping, and torture. And then another attempt at kidnapping. Who cares how severely intimidating the process is? You committed the most heinous act ever. The crime doesn't get any higher. But in September of 1999, Bulger's parents did appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, but failed to persuade the court that a victim of a crime has the right to be involved in determining the sentence of the perpetrator. So the European Court case led to the new Lord Chief Justice, Lord Wolf, reviewing the minimum sentence. In October of 2000, he recommended the tariff be reduced from 10 to 8 years, adding that the young offenders' institutions were a corrosive atmosphere for the juveniles. And that's a complete problem these days, too. Now, in June of '01, after a 6-month review process, the parole board ruled the boys were no longer a threat to public safety and that they could be released as their minimum sentence had expired in February of that year. The Home Secretary, who was David Plunkett, approved the decision, and they were released a few weeks later on lifelong license, and they only served 8 years for the murder of James Bulger. Both were given new identities, moved to secret locations under a witness protection type of program, and this was supported by the fabrication of passports and national insurance numbers, which are like social security numbers, and qualified certifications and other medical type records, dental, medical, stuff like that. Plunkett did add his own conditions to their license and insisted on being sent daily updates on what was going on with them. Now, they did have specific terms to the receipt, including they were not allowed to contact each other or James's family, and they were not allowed to visit the Merseyside region, and that they could put curfews in place, and they have to go to the probation officers. If they broke any of these rules, they would be then considered a risk to the public, and they could be returned to prison. An injunction was imposed on the media after the trial, preventing the publication of details about where the two were, or about anything about them. And it was a worldwide injunction and was kept in force following their release on parole. So their new identities and locations could not be published. And the injunction was granted because there was a real and strong possibility that their lives would be in danger if anybody would know who they were, which I can understand. Because serving 8 years would just be something that should have been a lifelong sentence. Now, some of you may be wondering what happened to the two after they got released. So, John began living as an independent life in March of 2002, and sometime later, he began a relationship with a woman who had a 5-year-old. Now, it's not known whether Venables had already begun downloading child abuse images at the time that he was dating this woman, though he denies have ever met the child. But in 2005, when John was 23, his probation officer met another one of his girlfriends he had, who was only 17. And after a number of young girlfriends, it was presumed that Venables was having what they call delayed adolescence. After a period of apparently reduced supervisions, Venable began excessively drinking and doing drugs and downloading more child abuse images, as well as visiting Merseyside, which is a breach of his license. So in 2008, the new probation officer noted that he had spent a great deal of leisure time playing video games and on the internet. But in September of that year, Venables was arrested on suspicion of a fray. Following a fight outside a nightclub, he claimed he was acting in self-defense, and the charges were later dropped after agreeing to go on an alcohol awareness course. 3 months later, he was found to be in possession of cocaine and was subjected to a curfew. And on 2 separate occasions, Venables revealed his true identity to a friend, which, again, was against his probation. So on March 2nd of 2010, the Ministry of Justice revealed that John had been returned to prison for an unspecified type of violation of terms of his license of release. And the Justice Secretary, Jack Straw, stated that Venables had been returned to prison because of extremely serious allegations, and said that he was unable to give further details of the reason for his return to custody, because it was not in the public's interest to do so. Now, on March 7th, the news outlets report said that Venables had been accused of child pornography charges. And in a statement to the House of Commons on the 8th of March, Straw reiterated that it was not in the interest of justice to reveal why Venables had been locked back up. Now, Baroness Butler Sloss, the judge who made the decision to grant Venables a nominee in 2001, warned that Venables could be killed if his identity was revealed. So on the 21st of June, 2010 still, he was charged with possession and distribution of indecent images of kids. And it was alleged that he had downloaded over 50 images of children over a 12-month period to February 2010. So you're talking February of 2009 to February 2010, and allowed other people access to his files. It was kind of like a peer-to-peer networking type of thing. And now he faces 2 charges under the Protection of Children Act 1978. Now, July 23rd, moving right along, Venables appeared at a court hearing at the Old Bailey, and it was a video link, visible only to the judge who was hearing this specific case. He pleaded guilty charges of downloading and distributing child pornography, and he was sentenced to 2 years in jail. Not exactly your, citizen you want hanging out at your kid's house or any house for that matter. Now, at the court hearing, it emerged that John had posed in online chat rooms as 35-year-old Donnie Smith, a married woman from the Liverpool area who boasted about abusing her 8-year-old daughter in the hope of obtaining further child porn. He had contacted his probation officer in February of 2010, fearing that his new identity had been compromised at his place of work. But when the officer arrived at his flat, Venables was attempting to destroy his hard drive and his computer with a knife and a tin can opener. He didn't obviously want to get caught. And the officer's suspicions were aroused, and the computer was taken away, and they decided to do an examination on it. And to the discovery of the child pornography, which included children as young as 2 being raped by adults and penetrative rape of 7 or 8-year-olds. What a sick dude. This dude is sick. Now, Venables, he was eligible on parole in July of 11. And on June 27th, the parole board decided that Venables would stay in custody. He didn't need to go anywhere. And he would not be considered for parole for at least another year. Good for them. Kept him for another year. Now, on May 4th of 2011, it was reported that Venables once again needed to be given another identity, following what was described as a serious security breach, which revealed an identity that he had been using before he got locked up in 2010. Now, details of the breach could not be reported for legal purposes, and a spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice commented, "Such a change of identity is extremely rare and granted only when the police assess that there is a clear and credible evidence of a sustained threat to the offender's life on release into the community. Your face is out there. I mean, there's really nowhere you can really run. Now, in November of 2011, it was reported that officials had decided that Venables would stay in prison for the foreseeable future, as he would be likely to reveal his true identity again if he got released. So on July 4th, it was reported that the parole board for England and Wales had approved the release of Venables. So on September 3rd, 2013, he was released again. But just a short time later, on the 23rd of that month of November 2017, it was reported that Venables had again been recalled to prison for possession of child abuse imagery. Again. So on February 7th of 2018, Venables pleaded guilty to possession of indecent images of children for a second time. He pleaded guilty via video link as they got tired of him being in the courtroom. And he had 392 Category A, 148 Category B, and 638 Category C child pornography images. So he was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months. Now we're going up to just last year in September of 2020, he was denied parole. Now, for Thompson, there's been nothing for him being locked up again, change his name, or anything. So apparently he must have been truly rehabilitated. Now, a couple of things on this. I'm wondering why nobody called the police for the initial kidnapping. When you see something suspicious, a boy walking down the street with a bruise on his head, maybe call somebody. Could save somebody's life. But 38 people made contact with this situation. Nobody called the authorities. If you see something, say something. It's as simple as that. Don't question yourself. If you think it's suspicious, it probably is. Gut feeling is usually right. As for turning your head away from your kids, we all do it. And things like that happen every day. Turn your head at the mall, and your kid's gone. Hopefully, like my case, a security guard was there. Because kids are mischievous. They want to wander away. When you go to the mall or go to a store, they like to hide in the clothes racks and stuff like that. So you got to be careful. Or you could buy one of them leashes that you have kind of like a dog with a collar, and you just walk around with them on. I see a lot of daycare centers do that, where they have like 6 or 7 kids, and they look like a centipede walking down the sidewalk, and which is pretty wild. Sometimes you got to do that. So if there's any lesson to be learned from this story, keep an eye on your kids, because you never know when it's the last time you're going to get to see them. Join me next week as we talk about crime that happened in Alaska. during a birthday weekend. Just a trip out fishing. See you then.